Thank you for joining us today. Martine, if you could just pop that slide down, we might get started. Fantastic. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Understanding Impact and Legacy, which is the final of our 2024 Power Hour virtual forums. We all know the Queensland Jobs and Energy Plan has identified that 95% of clean energy infrastructure is going to be developed in regional Queensland. And we also know that feedback from communities right across the state, which is backed by research such as the Dyer report, is telling us that we need to do better. We need to support people to better partner and engage with regional communities so that they get positive outcomes and lasting benefits, but also to build the collective social license of the sector. At Engaged Outcomes, we believe the gap is not so much technical skills, but rather a cultural understanding of working in regional communities. So as a result, we've been working with people all around the state for the last 18 months to understand their perceptions and their experiences with engaging during the energy transition. And this has been to develop our Regional Connect training program, which we're super excited to say we've actually got in pilot phase at the moment in partnership with Queensland Renewable Energy Council. During those conversations, invariably, we hear of the impacts, both positive and negative, and also that general concern that people have about obtaining positive legacy from the energy transition. So if you're wanting to know more about managing impacts and partnering with regional communities to deliver ongoing positive legacy, you certainly are in the right place today. My name is Wendy Agar from Engaged Outcomes, and I'm so excited to be delivering a real power hour to you today. It's going to be 60 minutes of awesomeness. From our keynote speaker, Rebecca Roebuck from Social Impax, right through to our expert panel with Melissa Hamilton, the Mayor of Southern Downs Regional Council, Zoe Kemp from formerly the Department of Energy, that's a bit like Prince, formerly was Prince, now the Energy Division of Queensland Treasury this week, and Rachelle Cooper Kulkarni from Indigenous Energy Australia, who unfortunately at the last minute couldn't join us, but she sent a video, so we're good to go. So hopefully you'll leave here today with some fresh insights and understanding and some actionable strategies for your engagement toolkit. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from the land of the Turrbal and Yagara people and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where you're calling in from today. The land of people who truly understood managing impact, and they really focused on long-lasting, generational positive legacy. So I'd like to pay my respects to them, their culture, and to their elders past and present. I need to also give a huge thanks to our partners for this series who've made it possible. Queensland Renewable Energy Council, Coexistence Queensland, Powerlink, and also the Energy Charter. A massive thank you to them for supporting my vision of giving forward and providing free access to best practice and world-class experts like you're going to hear today. So a bit of housekeeping before we get going. We're actually using Zoom. So Zoom's a little bit different to Teams, which most of us use. Firstly, I do need to mention we are recording today. So if you are uncomfortable with that, please leave your camera off. Although if you can, we love to see you. Please stay on mute. And we really want you to participate. I heard a great saying the other day, this will work so much better if it's like tennis and we're both active participants. So let's hit the ball back, people. Just use chat. And with Zoom, chat is down the bottom. So what I'd like you to do now is find chat, open it up, and if you can pop in an emoji about how you're feeling today and let us know where you're calling in from. So the chat box is just down the bottom. It looks like the same one on Teams. And we've got Kim from Northern New South Wales. Hello, Kim. And Jared from hot and sunny Brisbane. Hi, Anna. Okay, lovely. As they start to come through, it's fantastic to see we've got people from Perth and Cairns, and Christy from Waka Waka. Hello, Christy. Sunshine Coast, Sydney. Welcome, everyone. We're so pleased to have you here because this is such an important conversation. So without any further ado, let me actually introduce you to the keynote speaker, because I'm so excited to have Rebecca Roebuck with us today. Rebecca is a social impact advisor with a focus on supporting infrastructure, energy and development sectors to generate positive social impact. She's the managing director of Queensland-based company Social Impax, which operates right across the Asia-Pacific region. Some of her recent consulting work includes advising energy proponents around community benefit strategies, helping a multinational development company measure their global social value, and also developing an evaluation framework for a local government's community wellbeing strategy. You're certainly the most perfect guest speaker for today, Rebecca. Welcome, and I'm handing over to you.
Oh, thanks so much, Wendy. And let me know if you can't hear me. I'm hoping that sound is working okay at your end. Great, fantastic. Well, it's my pleasure to speak to you today about understanding impact and legacy. And I think a really important time in Queensland in terms of our renewable energy transformation. As Wendy said, it's been well acknowledged now in terms of some of the challenges that we do face, how important impact and legacy is as part of that. What I thought I'd do today is really focus on recognising that many of the audience here, based on what Wendy shared with me about her power hour participants, are generally community engagement people or operational people in the energy space. I really wanted to sort of come and share more from a social impact practitioner perspective. Some of the theories and the concepts and approaches that we use in our kind of social impact specific practice, hopefully to share some stuff that you haven't heard before, and recognizing we've got an amazing expert panel that will be talking later on as well, with Zoe, Mel, and others. I really wanted to also share not so much local examples from Queensland, but actually talk about some international projects as well. I'm hoping that you haven't heard about them before and maybe can give you some ideas and things that you haven't come across before. So I'm going to cover a bit of theory today, but hopefully it's a bit of mix of practical as well. So why impact and legacy should be on your agenda? I think Wendy actually already explained it really well. But I think this diagram is really telling. This has come from the Community Engagement Review report by the Australian Energy Infrastructure Commissioner. And it, in a survey that was asking for community member feedback about whether they believe their local community would benefit from large-scale renewable energy projects, there was overwhelming response in terms of strongly disagreeing that was what they were expecting would occur. Keeping in mind this is a bit of a skewed survey in terms of who would have responded to this. People that already had some particular views around it would have actually accessed this survey. But it really, I think, indicates that some of the social license challenges that we are now facing in the renewable energy transition and transformation activities are really symptomatic of an impact problem, both in terms of potential for negative impacts on people and communities, but also the failure to realise some of the positive benefits that can come from this transformational activity. So with that today, and I guess, leaning towards sort of focusing particularly on impact, a really good definition of impact that I like to use to kind of demystify it is a really simple one, which is just that impact is the consequence or effect of change. So there's something that has contributed to change, and then that has an effect, and that's where there's impact. If there is no effect, there's just change. There might not be actually a consequence or effect of that. There are different types of impact, like environmental or economic. I'm going to talk mainly about social impact today because that's my expertise area. So by that I mean impact on people and communities. Impact also, too, if you haven't come across sort of impact sort of thinking or impact frameworks before, it's very much not one-dimensional. So impact can be positive, it can be negative, it can be mixed, it can be sort of neutral impact as well. Impact can be big, it can be small, and the sorts of impact that people can experience can be really different even in the same community. And impact is very, very dynamic as well.
Cleopatra kiss.
Sorry? Oh, it can change as project change or as communities change also. again, probably just sharing some of the sort of
Sorry
tricks in the
about that.
social impact
Sorry, guys.
practitioner
I'm just going in this.
box. This is taken from the social impact guidelines in New South Wales and based on international social impact best practice as well. But we would generally approach looking at social impact on a project or operations, looking at different elements that are valuable to people. So things like people's livelihoods, their health and well-being, how they might access services and facilities, decision-making culture and way of life and community. So again, you can imagine, how we would go about looking at social impact. We'd think about a project or an operational initiative, whether that's going to have a positive, negative or neutral impact or big or small in these areas, how they might interplay together, how other projects might have cumulative impacts that might impact these things as well, and what else is happening in communities that could impact these areas. So it takes a really systematic approach from an impact perspective. These are just some examples from, I guess, a social impact domain perspective that we commonly see in renewable energy space. I've deliberately put these as neutral wording because in different projects, the same kind of impact can be positive or negative depending on the context. I've certainly seen projects where property values can go up, and I've seen projects where property values go down in the local area. So it really depends on the project and the context in which it is. The sorts of impacts that I'm commonly seeing in my work at the moment in Queensland, from a safety perspective, bushfire risk is regularly getting raised in relation to renewable energy projects that I'm working on. Housing, accommodation, again, very dependent on the community in terms of what that means and the project or renewable energy program that's working in that area. And visual amenity, really common too. Again, probably none of this is surprising to anyone on this call working in the space. But I did want to just sort of do a bit of I guess, a smorgasbord of the sorts of things that we're talking about in terms of impacts, particularly for different stakeholder groups in renewable energy. If there's any that you're really important in your work that I haven't mentioned here, it'd be great if you wanted to add that to the chat. It's a bit of a short list as it is. And just before I move on, I did want to point out mental health and well-being. This is really a feature we're seeing on, not so much a feature actually, but a risk area around impact for people and communities, particularly when there is uncertainty that can really impact people in terms of, being able to make decisions about their life and being worried about what impacts could be for them from projects. So something to really think about in terms of both impacts, but areas to minimise harm and risk to people as well. I've talked a lot about sort of theory stuff, and I really wanted to do that because I wanted to emphasise that impact is about change and the effect of change. And that's really the key things from an impact perspective. You can have a lot of initiatives that aim to provide community benefits and positive social impact, but they don't actually create change. They're not actually an impact area. They don't actually have a consequence or effect for people. Talking about community benefits as well, the really simple definition I like to use is it's about a positive social impact for a defined group of people. Normally we're talking about a location, like a local, community, but it can be a defined group for another sort of characterising region. So apart from community benefit and social impact, social value is another term that you'll hear come up a fair bit at the moment. It's on everyone's lips in the renewable energy sector at the moment. And again, the definition I think is a really simple one. It's the relative importance of social impact in context. So this concept that what's important in one community might be different in another community. So it's really about trying to understand what sort of impact is important for people that they might be experiencing. The other thing I wanted to make a note of in terms of impact and legacy were equity considerations, which is really critical in terms of the just transformation agenda that we do have. And certainly in Queensland, we've got a really key agenda about the energy transformation activities provide benefits for all Queenslanders. And I really would encourage you in your projects and operations to consider doing a specific equity assessment in relation to impact. And these are just some really useful questions here about different forms of equity that you might want to consider. But this is all about trying to understand who might be experiencing benefits or harms, and actually trying to think about, the equitable and fair distribution of benefits for everyone involved in terms of that could be affected by your project or operation. Along those lines, I just wanted to quickly talk about a project I was involved in the Solomon Islands, which is the Tina River Hydropower project. we were engaged to do a midterm review by the Solomon Islands government for a particular community benefits pilot program they introduced that was administered by the World Bank. And the Tina River hydropower project, it's a scenario that might be familiar to people here, just in terms of a lot of energy projects. But it was basically what it is going to do. They've actually just started construction on the main part of this project in the last month. But what it is doing is basically providing power that's going to go into the national energy grid for the Solomon Islands. And for the people in the villages that are surrounding the project site, they're not actually connected to the grid. So that's one of the reasons why they had a community benefits program, because they're recognising that the actual community in which the project site was, we're not going to experience benefits from going into the energy grid. So as part of the community benefits program, they did provide some early infrastructure to local communities, including some water infrastructure like water bores and water wells in village areas. And we had a look at an early stage about what impact that was having on communities. And one of the things that we did see as part of that was that although it was a benefit to the whole village community, it was women and girls that experienced benefits the most from that, mainly because for women and girls, it was in their traditional roles to go and collect water on a regular basis. So by having the water actually accessible within the village site itself, they had time savings and they actually basically less effort for them in relation to that. So it's a real good example of how different groups within a community can experience benefits in different ways. And you might find something that seems gender neutral actually might have a specific gender benefit for either women or men. I want to talk about legacy, mainly because Wendy included legacy in the title of this, so I thought I'd better talk about legacy as well. But legacy really just an extended effect of impact. It's impact that goes on for a bit of time, that lasts for a bit longer than a one-hit wonder or a sugar hit. Legacy, can be negative. It can be positive. And normally when we're talking about legacy, we are talking about positive social impact that's enduring. I've put legacy on the nose here because my personal view is it's a bit on the nose in Queensland, legacy, and I will blame the Brisbane 2032 Olympic Games for that. I think legacy is not in relation to the games itself, but just the term has just got used extensively. I find when I'm in some meetings with stakeholders, if you mention legacy, you'll see people flinch in some circumstances. So just maybe something to think about. It might not be relevant for your stakeholders, but sometimes the terminology isn't always welcomed by people, and you might just need to change the language. But I think that's dying down a bit. I haven't heard legacy quite as much as I did last year. Anyway, just on legacy as well, I did want to mention just something to watch out for in legacy is hero thinking and saviour mentality. One of the things I find particularly project managers and project directors actually really enjoy legacy planning, community benefit planning often. But I think too there's a tendency to get carried away and thinking that we know better than maybe what the local community knows about what they need or they want. And also too there can be a tendency to go for real big ticket items that are sort of your hero infrastructure or something that's going to be newsworthy or have a great media release or be able to report in the annual report. And my experience has been that a lot of the real enduring benefits that come from projects are often the smaller things, maybe the stuff that lasts for a long time, but doesn't necessarily require $1 billion infrastructure facility in a local community. So I really encourage you not to get carried away by sort of hero thinking or saviour mentality when thinking about legacy. Along those lines, I did want to share an example from Ireland, which is the Mount Lucas Wind Farm, which I had the opportunity to visit as part of a technical program through a conference when I was in Ireland earlier this year. And they had some really interesting community benefits and impact components to it. Some of it, we're familiar with here in Australia. For example, neighbours within a certain proximity were basically given reductions on their energy bills. There was also a community benefit fund, which was associated with the profits and indexed as well that came from this particular operation. But the main thing that really struck me was that it was forming the role of community infrastructure, so public infrastructure that community could access really quite openly. It was used, the access tracks between the wind turbines were used as sort of jogging tracks and for people walking dogs. We could see them while we were actually there during the visit. They had beehives. There was a sensory garden. There was like adult exercise equipment around. And just to sort of show you, you know, these are the beehives. This is sort of the park run. I think it's a weekly park run that they do in the area. One other thing that was interesting in this particular site, from the previous use in this property, there was some old equipment, and they'd sort of formed like a heritage kind of display with interpretive signage and stuff that you could have a look at. I wasn't that interested in it, but some of the engineers I was with thought it was really interesting. So yeah, just an interesting, I think, creative way to think about sort of, you know, building heritage into that facility as well. And this was their learning hub. So they had 45,000 visitors a year that they were reporting, and they had like a learning hub facility, which also served an operational function for the area as well. But you know, so they had some displays that people could do, and the schools could access this for free. And they had regular sort of school groups. So apart from sort of the cost of the building and the operations of that, most of their kind of community stuff was really relatively low cost stuff and quite targeted to the local community area as well. But yeah, I just thought an interesting example from outside Australia. In terms of measuring impact and legacy, which is where I do a lot of my work in terms of community benefits measurement, evaluation, and sort of social value capture, I thought what might be useful to share with you is just some standard questions that you can consider in your own work, really focused on what's changing for people who's experiencing change, both in terms of benefits and potential for harm or negative impacts, and actually thinking through also asking about what the consequence or effect of those changes are, and then how do you know if they're sort of lasting. You don't necessarily need to engage, you know, expert consultants to do this or do some massive program. Sometimes it can just be as simple as asking the stakeholders in your area that are affected by your operations what is changing for them and what that means for them. And these are really sort of the key questions that we would often use in that area. And in terms of how you actually approach measurement, you know, there are some situations where I would recommend a more robust impact measurement approach or community benefits monitoring, and how you actually go about do that really depends on what you're measuring. Normally I would suggest if you have a social ambition, then you measure against what those objectives are and actually tailor your measurement approach for that. But I wanted to highlight just some emerging practice in the social impact measurement space. And that includes particularly some trends and emerging practice. One is around community-led monitoring. This is becoming a feature not just in Australia, but overseas. And this is where community stakeholders have a high degree of control over what is being monitored in terms of impact, and how it's actually going to be monitored. And communities are given actual resources and support to do that. So there's a lot of power actually given to communities to do that monitoring rather than relying on proponents to tell them what the impact is that they're experiencing. Wellbeing measurements also really popular at the moment. This is really focused on changes in quality of life, and the federal government's national wellbeing framework. With that, the ABS is releasing regular data indicators regarding wellbeing, including which we expect to be at a local government area in the future that can be really useful in that space. Particularly useful for renewable energy zones and areas where there are multiple projects. System change, collective impact approaches is also really emerging as a big feature for social impact monitoring and community outcomes monitoring. And stakeholder basis impact measurement too, something we do a lot of at Social Impact, and we're finding quite helpful in the infrastructure space to focus not just on impacts for landowners and community and neighbours, but also across all the stakeholders impacted by an infrastructure project, such as workers, suppliers and end users too. So that's where you can look at things like affordability and reliability type issues. I've only got a couple more slides, but I wanted to share with you probably one of my favourite social impact indicators of the year, which is More Ice Cream Days, which was shared with me by a renewable energy project that's working in a remote Pacific Island community setting. When I asked them about what they were looking forward to as community benefits and sort of impacts they're expecting, this is a small scale solar project. They very quickly told me more ice cream days. And it's a situation where They don't have reliable energy supply, so they can't refrigerate food for very long in their community. And they basically, when the ferry, the inter-island ferry comes in, which is about once a month, that's the day where everyone will go down to the dock and have some ice cream off the ferry, because it's the only day they have to be able to eat ice cream. I just thought that was a really sweet and cool social impact indicator, because it really showed what actually would mean for them in terms of lifestyle, and maybe not healthy in terms of ice cream, maybe don't have it too often, but a really nice example of what it actually means for communities when you can actually improve energy supply and reliability, particularly in a remote island setting. So my power tips, I know Wendy's very much a fan of tips, so I wanted to share these quickly. Really encourage you to make an effort to understand what is relatively important for your stakeholders. That is the social value crux of social impact. Stakeholder engagement and land agents are normally really good at this, because you understand communities and what's important to them, but you have a great role that you can play in terms of communicating that to internal project teams and other stakeholders about what's really going on and what's really important to people. I really encourage you to aim for more than a sugar hit. Think about that sort of legacy piece for more of what can be an enduring, lasting impact that's important to people. And encourage you to explore opportunities for involving stakeholders in monitoring effect. That's really where practice is going at the moment, and much more community-led approaches. So look, I might finish there. If you're interested in this sort of topic, I do share regular content on LinkedIn around social value and impact measurement, and you're welcome to follow me there. And yeah, thanks very much for listening. I'll hand across to you now, Wendy.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was fantastic. There hasn't been any questions come through, but there's certainly been quite a few comments today around your content. And also I see that there is some links in there that people might want to follow for information that's complementary to what you're discussing. And unless a question comes through while we're waiting, I love the More Ice Cream Days measure. I think that's fabulous. And it's certainly partnering with communities and not being a hero was another one that really resonated with me and other people. So here's a question. Are there any renewable energy developers here? Have you worked with any developers to find creative ways to maximise local benefits in Queensland? Rebecca, or have you got ideas around that?
Oh,
sorry, I was asking you the question. Sorry, I was talking to myself. So have you worked with any renewable energy developers to find creative ways to maximise local benefits in Queensland?
Yeah, look, certainly we are working with a number of energy proponents in Queensland, particularly around community benefits. That's sort of our specialty area. I'm mindful too, our expert panel are going to share some really great examples of stuff that they're working on, so I don't want to sort of steal their thunder. But certainly we're seeing a lot of really exciting things happening in Queensland at the moment, and I think great to see a stronger role for local government especially.
Well, that's a lovely segue. So we'll probably keep going, and there's some questions there that we'll come back to if we have time. So the segue about local government, let's power on and hear from our expert panel. And they love questions, so if you've got any, pop them in the chat box. So firstly, it's a massive thank you for joining us today, Melissa and Zoe. It is really generous of you to donate your time and turn up here. And also a big thank you to Rachel, although she couldn't actually make it, she has sent a recording through. So I'll introduce you both one at a time, and then we'll come back with some questions at the end, hopefully. So I'd like to start by introducing everyone to Mayor Melissa Hamilton from Southern Downs Regional Council. Melissa has a significant international career as a finance lawyer, working both in Australia and the UK. And during that time, she covered international projects across Europe, the Middle East, the United States and Africa. She was the successful candidate for Mayor of the Southern Downs Council in the 2024 elections, so it's her maiden year, and is passionate about strategically harnessing the opportunities offered by the energy transition in her region, which there's several large-scale wind farms there already and lots happening. So welcome, Melissa.
Thank you, Wendy.
So share, what is your experience with the impact of renewable energy developments in your region?
Yes, look, I'd have to say at this point it's very much jury out. We have the McIntyre wind farm, which is the largest wind farm in the Southern Hemisphere, and we share that with Gundawindi Regional Council. So we have a very small percentage of the turbines in that project, but access is all through the Southern Downs, not through Gundawindi. So I like to say we get 5% of the benefit of the project and we get 95% of the pain. I'd have to say it's not necessarily something that I would put at the feet of the proponent at all. There are a number of factors in that. I think one, it was early days in stage one in looking at how to do those kind of projects in regional Queensland, but also I think they suffered a little bit from a lack of engagement at council level, which is something that the new council is definitely trying to remedy. So I think, you know, I'm not going to say it's all up to proponents. In fact, we as local government have to engage if we're going to drive the right kind of legacy and impact in our regions. And I think that for a lot of us across regional Queensland, there are some communities like Western Downs and Isaac who have had either the CSG, the coal seam gas boom, or mining booms, and they're used to dealing with proponents. They've got a very organised platform in terms of what they expect from a community benefit side of thing. But a lot of us in regional Queensland and Southern Downs, absolutely included, we have an agricultural background. We are at ground zero of learning how to look after ourselves and how to punch it out with the proponents in these projects. So I think I would say that the engagement is going to vary a lot across regional Queensland depending on the experience of the council in the projects. And we, as I said, we're at ground zero to the extent that next year council are actually running a community engagement project to find out exactly what social licence looks like in the Southern Downs. We have a good idea of what we think would be good for our region. You know, you're elected as a council, so you're passionate about your community and you think you have a good feel for it. But we want to make sure that we're actually speaking with the voice of the community and not just taking that decision on ourselves. So we're running a large project next year to try and actually get some really clear indications from the community about what they think social licence is in the Southern Downs.
I love that you're seeking to hear beyond the normal respondents, Melissa, that you're really trying to seek out diverse voices in that project. And I also know that you had a renewable energy roundtable yesterday in your region with a lot of key stakeholders for your region at that. Did you talk about what positive benefit? I'm saying benefit now, Rebecca, I'm freaking out about legacy. Did you talk about positive benefit for your communities yesterday and how you're going to move forward from here so that you get more than the 5% and the 95%?
Yeah, we certainly did talk about positive benefit. And one thing that I've been trying to get across to potential proponents and existing proponents in the region is that what hasn't been done very well is that, and I agree absolutely with Rebecca on this, it does not have to be high cost. It does not have to be a hero project. But I think sometimes the engagement people at the proponents, you can get caught in a bubble. You can get caught in feeling that the projects you're working on are really worthy, those community projects. But if they're not visible, they are useless. And I think that graph that Rebecca showed us at the beginning, that 71%, if I walk down the street here, the test would be if I walk down the street and I stop someone in the middle of Warwick and say, you know, that very big wind farm that we have out on our western border, do you think we have a benefit from that? I can guarantee you 100% the answer will be no. Because the projects that have been done have been amounts given to certain community groups. If you hit someone from that small community group who got solar on their roof of their shed, you know, out in a small village, they'd say yes, but it's a tiny group in our community. So the projects, I think, if you're going to talk about shifting the dial on that 71% of people, the projects have to be visible. and they have to be tangible. And I think that that's where local government comes in, is that we deliver those kind of projects. We also deliver them with a communication message which shows the community what they're getting. And so we have a long history in doing visible and tangible delivery. And that's where the proponents would be better off, rather than thinking that they're going to look good by delivering their own projects. They would be better off, in fact, delivering them, in my view, through council if they want to get bang for their buck. And absolutely that we co-design what that looks like. It's got to tick their boxes as well. But I would just say that that visibility is what's been missing in our area.
Thank you, Melissa. I do have one more question of you before we move on to Zoe. So you're really clear on the pathway that you're moving forward to ensure that you get everyone at the table. You're not, it's having the conversation, shared decision making, co-design of benefits for all parties involved. What do you think are the 3 things that people on this call should be thinking about to broadly support benefits in your region, or any region really?
Yeah, look, I think the number one that I go on about all the time with people is early engagement. Like, it is never too early to engage and start those conversations. It will result in a better result in the long term if you take the time to engage very early. One thing that would be particularly helpful to us too is better data. So what wasn't done in the earlier wind farms here, and what we've been clear about with stage 2 and also with new proponents, is if they don't keep the data on local spend and local employment and local contractors, we can't sell the story. So you've got to have good data to help us with that message. I've already talked about involving council in that community fund and legacy project space. What I would also say about that, though, is the reason you get a better bang for your buck is we can also then accumulate community funds from multiple proponents so that the projects are actually more substantial, and that's always going to be good for the community. And I'd just say that people in Southeast Queensland, people on the Eastern Seaboard probably don't understand, and Wendy, you'll love this, I know, but you probably don't understand that in some ways, talking about the Pacific Islands and communities that don't have services are not that far away from us in regional Queensland. So, we have the largest wind farm project in the Southern Hemisphere, but we have the most unreliable grid in Queensland. We have, a very low income demographic, but we get no benefit at all on electricity prices. So if you're going to talk about community benefit, one of the early things to me is our communities are small. It would really be no skin off the nose of a proponent to offer electricity pricing benefits as part of their project. It's a simple thing, but it would make such a massive difference to people in the community who really are low income, who are struggling at the moment, and where electricity is one of their biggest stress points in their life. So that's probably the number 3 one.
Thank you, Mel. So I've got early engagement, share your local data, so better local data. And I can think of one of the people I know quite well at Miles always says, local data means miles, it doesn't mean Maranoa. So what seems local is actually ask people what's local. It will be their town most probably. And you're suggesting to involve council, so there's coordination of those benefit funds, which everyone is calling out for. So thank you, Mel. So let's hand over to Zoe. So Zoe, you are the Director of Community Benefits Energy at the new division, the Energy Division of Queensland Treasury, since the election. So thank you so much for joining us. You've got an incredible career with government in Australia and UK, and your background and interest is in relationships between people and the places they live. You hold a degree in, or degrees, sorry, in ecology, environmental management, and land use planning. You have significant international experience with environmental and social policy reform, and you're currently leading regulatory and policy reform to ensure that communities in Queensland benefit from the energy transition. Some of which that's how I met you. So it's been fabulous to learn much more about your background. So thank you for joining us today, Zoe.
Thanks for having me, Wendy.
So I'll ask a tricky question, which you might dance around a little bit, but what's the role of the Energy Division of Queensland Treasury in overseeing impact and legacy in Queensland right now? If you can answer that.
I'll do my best. I mean, yeah, obviously we had an election recently, so I absolutely wouldn't try to speak for the, the priorities of the new government, and we're still working through what that will look like in practice. But overall, the role of a public servant is, delivering on the direction that is set by ministers through policy, legislation, and programs, and it's also about providing advice to ministers. So I guess practically what that means is, we engage with communities and stakeholders. We want to understand their needs. We want to understand, how they engage with governments and for them to engage with the programs that we deliver. We use that then to provide advice back to ministers on the views of stakeholders and communities and how policy impacts them and what they're looking for from policy and from government. And then we will use that to develop new policy, so which we would test with stakeholders and communities. And ultimately, sometimes that leads to legislation, sometimes it leads to legislation creation, sometimes reform, sometimes, removal. So it can have a wide range of impacts. I mean, over the last couple of years, and this is very much speaking to what we did under the previous government, we ran a range of programs and initiatives in partnerships, and partnerships are a really big part of the way that we operated. We worked with the Queensland Farmers Federation to develop the Landholder Toolkit, which I know a lot of people are very aware of, and that's supported by a phone line, which we've worked with Queensland Farmers Federation to stand up. We've worked with QREC around developing industry-leading practice, and that was something that I think we felt is really important, a partnership with industry on how what better practice would look like and should look like. We've worked with Queensland Conservation Council around securing better outcomes, environmental outcomes from renewable energy. And now we're also looking at things like community ownership models with the Community Power Agency. And yesterday I was in Toowoomba and Dalby with the Business Renewable Centre Australia, where they're rolling out power purchase agreement training. So we're looking at a range of different initiatives that can really work with different stakeholders, different community groups, where they are, to really lean into what they're interested in and what they want out of the energy transformation. We work with LGAQ and councils, of course, as well within that. And then finally, I would just say, in terms of policy, we're currently consulting on the draft renewables regulatory framework. At the moment, that's open until the 6th of December. And that really poses a question of, do we have the right regulatory framework in place for renewable energy? And what is there anything we need to do to make it fit for purpose?
Thanks, Zoe. So from your broad experience, what do you see as the critical factors for working with communities for a positive outcome?
I think I'm going to touch on things that have been brought up right the way through this series, Wendy, and I think echoing some of the points that have already been made today. So really, early engagement, I think, is incredibly important. I hear quite a lot in industry the fear of engaging communities early and how that raises community concerns. And I actually think, communities really want to be engaged early. They want to understand what the process is, how they can get involved, and how they can stay involved. So I think, this comes down to, I think, removing some of that anxiety that we see in communities, listening, finding, a range of ways to meet people where they are and really listen to their experiences and concerns and needs, supporting them by providing data and information that's easily digestible and in a format that they can use, so that everyone's an equity thing in there. Everyone's working off the same data. And making engagement opportunities really accessible to the community. Trusting, I think that's, starting from the perspective that communities really know what is important to them, and trusting that communities have their own best interests at heart and really are the experts in their own lives and their own places. and being respectful. So acknowledging that people have really busy lives, and that what we want to talk about, we government or we industry want to talk about, may not align with their priorities. We need to accept that people have really different perspectives. They have different ways of knowing, they have different information, and we need to create a space where, you know, we can engage with them in ways that really respects their needs and respects where they're at the moment. Then I think partnerships, and here I'm thinking about power imbalances in engagement. So often industry have information that communities don't have. Comes back to that really, you know, providing information, providing data, and finding ways for communities to be equal partners. And then I think that partnership and that engagement has to be inclusive. So we need to find ways to hear from a wide range of voices in community, and pay particular attention to cultural protocols, to language and different language groups, and to different ways of knowing and understanding place. That then leads to a shared information and shared understanding, and being honest about, you know, I think for industry to be really honest about what they know, what they don't know, this comes again down, I think, down to process, and a little bit about honesty about how likely is our project to go forward, or what is the process that we're going through? What are those gateways that we need to pass through, and how communities can really engage with that? And then finally, I think it's about outcomes. And this is all about, we're talking legacy, but I think I would call it maybe outcomes. And it's about focusing on the end goal. It's not just about getting the infrastructure built and the energy onto the grid, but I think we're really talking here about how do we hold genuine community outcomes right at the center of the project. So I've got a little sentence that summarizes that, which is early listening, supporting trusting, respectful partnerships to achieve inclusive shared outcomes.
I'm still writing notes. I'll have to get you to pop that in the chat for us, Zoe. That's excellent.
Okay.
So you've worked all around the world, and I am aware of the time, but I don't want to miss this snippet. From your experience of working with communities in Scotland, what are you observing, and what have you observed happening overseas that are transferable learnings? We heard from Rebecca about the Irish wind farm with some great, simple, not expensive things that were making a real difference to those communities. What else have you seen?
I would actually reflect on my favorite experience, which was actually, I was an applicant and a community member rather than in my workplace. But the Scottish Government ran the Climate Challenge Fund. It ran from 2008 to 2022. And they provided over £100 million in project funding, which funded about over 1,000 projects right across, you know, communities right across regional urban Scotland. And those projects were all aimed at taking climate action. So it was mitigation and adaptation. So communities, you know, developed active travel programs. They looked to cut their waste. They grew local food. They lowered energy use in homes and their community buildings. And my community, you know, benefited from that as well. But what we really saw, and my community also experienced this as well, was that beyond the actual project and the impact of the projects themselves, we saw incredible community capacity building. The funding that was provided required communities to establish trusts, to set up bank accounts, to create governance, and had the support to do so. Some investment, and that was really about trusting communities to know and help them to define what was really important for them. And it kept the bureaucracy really light touch as well, and very fit for purpose. And what it led to, I think, was a real maturity in regional communities and towns and villages right across Scotland in having much better capability of advocating for themselves. And what we saw out of that, and there's a renewable energy example, which was Fintry community, and you can Google this. They've fairly recently purchased a wind turbine from a local wind farm that was being built. And the only reason they had that capacity and capability was because they'd had this early pump priming and early experience of developing their capability. So that was, I think, a really good example of, government providing investment and support, but then really getting out of the way to let communities develop what was right for them.
Oh, that's a beautiful story of a relatively small program empowering so much more. Made me think of the work, and I'll have to get you to put in chat what the actual community is, because I didn't quite catch it, but Totally Renewable Yak and Dandar is an Australian project that's really super impressive and worth Googling, where a community of just over a decade made a massive difference because it's what they wanted. So Totally Renewable Yak, that's worth looking at. So thank you so much, Zoe. I really loved what you've added to the conversation today. And unfortunately, we're going to hand over to Rachelle Cooper Kulkarni, and unfortunately she can't be on the call, but luckily she's pre-recorded her part of the panel. So I'm going to hand over now to Martine to just do a screen share. Oh, there's me. And I am not Rachel. Yay. Thank you so much, Martine. We don't have any sound. Okay. That's a trick. So there's Rachel, and she's recorded her session, but unfortunately we can't hear that, which is strange.
Came into the energy and engagement space.
Can you hear it now?
Yes, thank you.
Hold on. Let me go back a few seconds.
Indigenous
Okay.
Energy Australia. I just want to do a quick acknowledgement to elders past, present and emerging on the call with us and from across all the countries on which we're meeting on this call together today. So my background, my story and how I came into the energy and engagement space. I've been working in different industries for the past 10 years in a project management and change management role. And this has always involved stakeholder engagement, so understanding the frameworks, the processes, and helping others within organisations to do appropriate engagement. And I think that's a thread that I've carried through. So in 2020, I was working in London in the middle of COVID, and sustainability was really my key driver. And I was just wondering, how can I make a bigger difference? I was trying to do that within my organisation, but in a really peripheral role. And I just kept asking myself, what can I do? What can I do that's going to have a real impact? And so I decided to study a master's in sustainability. And that's been a really great journey. And within that, I came to renewable energy. So renewable energy is responsible for around 73% of emissions. And so that's where I decided was the space that I really wanted to focus on. And I remember one paper in particular that I read that said we already have the technology that we need within energy. It's a social challenge. And so that's really where I've since focused my efforts in this space. And last year, obviously, we had a referendum, and that was a key moment for me, understanding the challenges that we've got in, and the opportunities, but in the First Nations energy space. I really decided to focus my efforts in that area. And now I'm very privileged and honoured to be working at IEA in this role and doing grassroots community engagement that hopefully makes a difference. So what has working with First Nations taught me about shared benefits, impact and legacy? It's that this is really front and centre within the lives, within the ways of being of these communities, of these people. I think often, so I spoke recently at All Energy about the different worldviews that we have. So in our Western worldview, we often think about projects and think about Indigenous peoples and what benefits they can get from projects, what positive and negative impacts it will have on them, but from a really peripheral point of view. So we're looking at it from different frameworks, maybe free, prior and informed consent, maybe it's social value, but it's always a small part. And what I've learned from working with communities across Australia is that the Indigenous worldview has impact, has shared benefits front and centre. So one of these examples is we're doing the community engagement for the Yarrabah microgrid project, and communities there that we've spoken to and we've said, what is it that you want out of this project? And you know, they'll give us their point of view, but always we hear, well, have you spoken to the people over at the beach? Have you spoken to those that are off grid? Is this going to benefit our elderly, our young people? And so there's this inherent sense of impact and legacy within these communities. And I think that's the biggest thing for me, is just that it needs to be considered within its entirety of how we're engaging and how we're working with people. So my top things to consider around impactful engagement with First Nations communities. First and foremost, just be a good human. So, you know, listen to people, respect people. I think that's really the most important. And just being aware that you're coming into their space more often than not, unless you're already a community member and you're familiar. So try and understand how they want to be engaged, how they want to be communicated with. What is the context that you're coming from and what is their context, and just trying to meet them where they're at. And I will always try and listen and, you know, explain why you're there, but listen in the first instance. And so my second really important thing is relationships. Relationships are key to everything in this space. So, you know, looking at whatever objectives that you might have for your engagement, that's really important. But the way to get to that is by having a great relationship with the people that you're working with. And the last thing is just integrity. So doing what you say you're going to do. Even if the project doesn't go ahead, you know, be transparent, be straightforward. Hey, we're actually at a really early stage of this project and we need to get funding still. And that's okay. But it's in having that integrity. And more broadly, so my advice for good community engagement in general. So earlier this year, I worked with regional communities in Queensland, and so that was farmers, councillors, landholders, and that was to do research as part of my degree on a just transition. And we were looking at both positive and negative impacts for the local community as a result of the energy transition. And we created a system map that looked at all the different components that are influencing one another. And so the top 4 findings out of this were community empowerment, community benefits, community renewable energy projects, and the most interesting one is social license, which I'm sure you've talked a lot about today. So that is a really critical one that has many different relationships within the system itself, and we need to get right to have communities on board, and more importantly, to get to those benefits. So I'm actually launching the summary report of my research tomorrow, which I'm happy to share with everyone on this call. And the purpose of that was to create something that's accessible, so that you don't need to read 150 pages, but you can still get the highlights of what we found out of that. And I'm sure that Zoe's talked to a lot of the initiatives that the Queensland Government has been doing to date within that space, which is really great. So just before I go, I'm going to leave you with a takeaway. Something that I do is I just try to ask myself, what will my impact be? What will my legacy be? And I think do whatever lights you up. I consider myself to be impact and purpose driven, and I think we get more successful results if we are. So whatever is your niche, whatever is your interest, do what lights you up, and just consider whether you're having a positive impact on who you're working with. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Martine, for doing that. That's fantastic. So we aren't going to have time for questions from the floor today because we are running a little bit over. Thanks, Martine. But I really do want our speakers, I really would love just one key takeaway from our 3 speakers that we do have here. And sorry, I was really amiss because that recording sort of cut off Rachel at the front. So Rachel is the Head of Impact and Innovation at Indigenous Energy Australia, and I will definitely put the link to her research in the blurb when I put the recording up on my website. So now, back to our current speakers who are here. What's your one key takeaway that you want people to leave this session with? Sorry.
Shall I go first, Wendy?
That'd be great,
Melissa. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously, from my perspective, my key takeaway is where you can engage with the local council. It's not always possible, depending upon their attitude, but if you can engage with them, it will give you a much better outcome.
Thanks, Mel. Rebecca, what's your one key takeaway?
Focus on what's changing for people and what's relatively important for them.
Lovely. Thank you. And Zoe?
I'm going to say it's about genuine relationships. I absolutely agree with Rachel on that one, and focus on what can we do to support community well-being, but really focused around what's important for that community. It has to come from them, and don't be a hero.
Oh, we all love that. Okay, so thank you so much, guest speakers. It's been an absolute honour to have such amazing expertise on the call today, once again. Before we wrap up, and apologies for going a little bit over time, we haven't done this for quite a few virtual forums yet. We'd got better at managing our time, but today it slipped away a bit. Before we wrap up, I'd really like to throw to the CEO of our project, one of our project partners, Queensland Renewable Energy Council, for a few words. So thank you, Katie Ann, for joining us today.
Thanks, Wendy. Look, I know everyone's a bit over time, but I think the key takeaway is thank you so much for our speakers from local government and the experts in the room, Rebecca as well, and Rachel, who was on the line. Thank you so much for sharing. This is you do such a wonderful job, Wendy, and I think our industry and the policy decision makers and developers from government in the room as well. It's a real pleasure to be part of and share this knowledge and experience. So I've got a whole list of learnings that I've taken out of today. I'll send it around to our members in our weekly wrap up tomorrow. But other than that, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much to Wendy and Martine as well for helping us on the line as well.
Thank you, Katie Ann. I've written so many notes. It's always like this. I get to the end of the virtual forum and think, what am I doing with all of this wisdom? So thank you to everyone who's joined us today. This is the final Power Hour virtual forum for this year. It has been such a delightful gift, this idea that I posed to Katie Ann one day, that she took a bit of a leap of faith in backing me and finding some other people who would back me as well. And it's just turned out to be such a beautiful gift to be able to bring all these incredible people onto one call and harness all their wisdom and just come out with all these nuggets of gold. So all of the virtual forums are on my website. So if you go to that QR code, it will take you there. And they truly are a fantastic resource. So I do encourage you to go and check out the other ones if you weren't on the line for them, because they were fabulous as well. Thank you again, Rebecca, Melissa, Zoe, and Rachel for her joining us virtually today. And thank you, Martine, from Energy Charter there in the background, waving your fairy wand and making sure we're all on track. So once again, thank you to everyone who's joined us today, and for any of the other virtual forums over the last 6 months. Hopefully you stay in contact with us, because we would love to stay in touch, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Wendy.
Welcome, everyone.